I thought Ochuko's answers in her Monday Media Diet were really interesting. I subscribed to the newsletter, and I have found it to be a really fantastic source for the newsletter, and just generally like a great barometer of how smart, engaged young people are looking at their media landscapes through a cultural lens, but also through a business and marketing lens. So anyway, Ochuko, welcome.
I'm glad to be here. No, this is the first time I'm hearing someone in the Substack space describe my newsletter, and I like that. It's fun.
Cool. Well, listen, I'll send you the AI transcript of this conversation. You can certainly borrow it, take it as a pull quote, whatever you want to do with it. Like
I love it. I haven't built out my about page yet, like 5 months in, so this is going to help me. Yeah.
No, you're only 5 months into
I'm
Substack?
only 5 months in. It seems like I've been there forever, right? It's insane.
Well, it does, and it does partially because you got, the witty thing. I think why is this interesting? Witty is a huge cosign. Because they were very early on the platform. They did a lot to drive people certainly to my Substack, and then also just generally speaking, I think Colin and Noah are great validators of smart and interesting voices. So to get that cosign probably 3 months in is...
No, it was a big deal. So I'd been following them for a while, and I remember I was going to the day they reached out to me. They had just done a podcast with Day 1 FM, which I love.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, love them. One day I'm going to be on this. I was like, one day. And then I was traveling to Portland to see my boyfriend, and I had taken like the train in the wrong direction, complete wrong direction. And so I was like,
Montana?
No, literally, no, I was in Germany. The plane the train to Frankfurt, wrong direction. It was so embarrassing. I called my boyfriend, and then I was in this like middle of nowhere train station. And I saw the message, and I was like, is this a spam? I was like, no, but Substack doesn't have spams. And then I called my boyfriend. I was like, this is a big deal. I know you don't understand Substack, but it's a big deal. And so I was super excited about that as well.
Yeah, well, look, those guys are really smart. So I think take your flowers from that one. But also, I thought it was interesting because they are, they're endlessly curious, right? Which is the thing that we like about them. And I the way I like to describe myself, I think it's probably true of you too. And so, yeah, it was great. And then but you've also gotten a bunch of other like big cosigns. Emily Sundberg co-signed you yesterday in Feed Me.
I saw that. Yeah, that was pretty exciting.
You must have woken up to a bunch of new subscribers this morning.
Yeah, no, it's hard to know. I think definitely I did. She's huge, and my friend actually like sent me the screenshot, and I was really excited. But so this week, Substack reached out to me, and I'm on their like Discover page, I believe. And so I've been getting like a shit ton of subscribers this week.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so it's kind of like, I don't even know where they're all coming from. Like, is it the Beyonce essay? Is it Emily's newsletter? Is it like the Substack, like whatever? So it's just been like a week of like every 2 minutes, I like refresh my like whatever. And it's like, psh. You know how it's like 100 every time? Yeah. I'm like, what's happening?
Amazing. That's amazing. Well, unfortunately, and I've had conversations with Kyle Raymond Fitzpatrick from the Trend Report about this, but unfortunately, in order for you to figure out where that traffic source is, you're going to have to do a little digging. So I don't know if you necessarily have time for it, but given that you've got a full-time 9 to 5 gig when you're not newslettering, right?
Yeah, no, it's a tough one. It's a really tough one. I think people ask me that a lot when they realize that I have a full-time job and at Adidas. I think that, what I say is that it's Nuremberg. I live in Nuremberg. I don't live in New York. I don't live in LA. There isn't that much to do. And so, and there isn't that much like cultural stimulation as well. Part of why I started was because when I moved here, I was like, okay, I know I want to move back to the US. When I move back, I don't want to be in Portland. I want to be in LA. I want to be in New York. And I was really anxious about like losing my grip on stuff because when you're here, it's in like such a completely different world, right?
Yeah.
And so I found Substack through Casey Lewis's newsletter. This was like 2 years ago. And when I graduated, I was working Adidas Originals brand comms, and I was like the Gen Z 22-year-old. And they were like, give us like a bi-weekly digest of what young people are doing. And I was like, okay, I'll just do what Casey's doing, but for my team. And so that was really fun. I used, the company money to subscribe to like all the like publications and stuff. And I love that. I love that part of my job, just like figuring stuff out, how's like what's happening in tech and business fashion, how does it relate to Adidas? And so when I moved over here, so I work on the membership team. So it's not super marketing heavy. And I'm a marketer, I'm a brand girl. And I was like, okay, I'm not in the US, I'm not in this job that's like, my thing. I need something to make sure that like I stay on it. And so I started this, well, I joined someone else on the Adidas social team who was doing this thing called Addy Pulse. So once a week, you just send like a digest. And I was like, can I do that once a week? You do once a week, I do once a week. And I was like, actually, no, like I want to write about all sorts of stuff that I can't send to my like company disk list, right? Sure. And, you know, I was still reading Casey Lewis. Oh, I love her newsletter. I thought it was so fun. And I was like, I want to do this. But I had this in my head for like a year because I don't write. I'm not a writer. And I was really, I don't like being embarrassed online. I was like, like I don't want to do this.
Embarrassed online. Talk about that a little bit. I mean, like, you wrote, you kind of deviated from form the other day and wrote a take on why Beyonce hasn't been a bigger commercial success in her partnerships, Ivy Park and House of Darion and so on and so forth. You mean that as someone who doesn't typically opine in that way, you were afraid of being
I was afraid of it being bad. Exactly. No, I mean, now I'm more comfortable with it. Actually, the first time I really spiked on Substack was an essay I wrote a couple of months before I launched my Substack. And one, you know, I published 3 times a week. There was one day that it was a holiday in the US. And so I didn't want to do a news roundup because like people are going to be out, but I wanted to be consistent. So I sent out this essay, but it's still like my top like thing in my publication, and it went viral. It did really well.
What was that? What was that? I don't know if I saw that. What was that?
It was about like why everyone wants to be like the internet's librarian. It was about, you know, lit girl culture, books, whatever. It was just like this random thing. And that did so well. And I've been scared to put an essay out after that because I was like, well, you know, it's not going to get 1,000 likes. I don't want to do this. But I woke up that morning and Beyonce was like, I have all these bullet points, kind of like you have in the list you sent me. And Beyonce just happened to be the first. And so I started writing. I couldn't stop. And it was an essay. And it went out and yeah, it was what it was. But I think to that writing part, you know, like I said, like I'm a brand girl. That's what I know how to do. And I hadn't written since like college. And that was like college papers. I didn't think of myself as a writer. I had friends who were writers. And I don't like to do things if I don't think I'm going to be quite good at it. And so it was like, oh, like I have all these ideas and opinions and takes, but like, I don't want to be shit online. That's embarrassing. You know, everyone thinks they're a writer and they're also shit. Like, am I going to be shit? And so I had that in my heart for a long time.
Imposter syndrome then, essentially.
Exactly.
Like, as
basically.
the kids would call it.
Exactly.
Okay. I got it. I'm fascinated by the fact that as Seen On By started with internal communications at Adidas, partially because that's the way that SIC started as well. It was my roundup. It was a very different thing. It was a sort of it was a way of me trying to communicate as one of the older people in the office to the kids, euphemistically speaking, of course, the ways in which I thought we needed to see the market and our competitive set and our opportunities holistically. So it's kind of fascinating that you were coming up from the other way. It was I used to ask people for that all the time. I was like, can you guys give me a please, like what the kids are listening to kind of post? And that was very specific to the music side of things, but it was also, you know, it's the same motivation. It's just like, please help me round out my perspective and demonstrate to me that you can see the market holistically. And that's to be what's the word? Like to be more specific. Sorry, podcasts are not the place you want to have your words fail you, but so there you go.
You're good.
Yeah, thank you. To be more specific, I think it's what I find really exciting about your output with As Seen On By, and also with what Emily does, what Casey does, etc., is that there is this holistic sense of how like a little cultural development relates to a big market movement, the way that a small social indicator relates to a massive trend. And I think you guys are, you know, I think you do a very good job of that, and as do the others. How did you come to that? Did you I don't know, have you always been sort of intellectually omnivorous, or
I like that phrase. You keep giving me material. I love this. Okay.
It's all yours. You can have it.
We talked about this a bit off camera. So I was born in Nigeria. I'm 25 now. I lived there till I was 16. I moved to Canada, and then I moved to the US, and then I moved here to Germany. And so every place I've lived, my family hasn't been with me. So I've moved around a lot. So I've had to do a lot of like understanding my landscape in life, like really quickly, right? I was a scholarship kid. I had to like learn all the things, all the whatever. And I think from when I moved to the US, as an international student, you have to get a job straight out of college that pays a certain amount, and they have to sponsor you. So it has to be like a really good job.
This is purely from a visa, like an immigration
from a visa
status,
status,
right?
exactly. You know, so I had to be like really good, but I'm good academically, but I'm not like straight A student, whatever. And I remember my sophomore year, I was in my bunk bed, and I was like, okay, I can't like, my thing can't be my academics. It has to be something else. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be that girl who just like does really cool shit. That's going to be my thing. And so I just started to learn. I would listen to podcasts like a maniac. My roommates were like, not about it, but I wanted to understand how things work. I would subscribe to whatever it was. I would go to like any tech conference. I would join anything. I wanted to know all of it, right? And so I think that's probably what's cool about the newsletter, and what you picked out is that it's not just news. It's kind of like connecting the dots between different industries, different like ideas, contextualizing stuff. And I think because I've moved around a lot, you sort of like learn how to figure out a place, figure out a landscape, figure out who are the players, what's happening, what's the underlying culture, that kind of thing. And just like being curious, right? I read a shit ton. Like, do you know the summer recaps that Substack did for us? Of like, I posted mine, and people were like, "You read a lot. Like, why is your number so high?" And I was like, "Yeah."
So just for those who aren't familiar, Substack created it's a little bit like the Spotify year-end wrap-up, where they go through and they encapsulate all of the stuff that you read over the previous year. They released it in September, which I thought was sort of odd because it wasn't a calendar year. It was sort of like, we're going to work off the Substack fiscal year or something weird like that. Anyway, but it gave you the number of I guess words that you've read over the course of time. Yeah. So mine came in the I think 2 million-ish kind of zone.
Mine was 4 million something.
Okay. So people ask me all the time how I managed to get through everything, and the truth is I skim liberally.
Yeah. Also, I think it's like, I have this thing where I open every single email even I'm not reading it. So I think that is also like, if it's open, it counts as read, which is not always the truth.
Yeah, I have to, speaking of that, the Substack analytics, so like trying to figure out how open rate works and how, you know, any of those things work with all of the different systems by which people read emails is you know, it's
tough.
We're not going to figure it out on this podcast, basically. So let's not try.
I feel that. Yeah.
Well, listen. So you know, those who listen know that SIC Talks is ostensibly about being a companion to the newsletter that I publish on Thursdays, and having my guests pick out a few stories that they think are interesting from the current week's array, and helping me understand why they thought they were interesting, and us just having a conversation about it. So I'd love to start there. You sent me back 5 or so articles. There was Chappell Roan's War on Fandom. There was Substack is Design Journalism's Irreverent New Home. There was CNN and their new Paywall. There was After, the new dating app. There was Kids going to school in the American South, and there was Sophia Amoruso moving to Substack. Where do you want to start? Because we can then bounce around from there.
Let's go from the top. Let's start with Chappell. I've been thinking about Chappell a lot. I wrote about her in, I want to hear your thoughts as well. But I don't know, like in my head, I've been doing a lot of comparisons of her and Sabrina Carpenter, right? Sure. They are both like young Gen Z women coming up around the same time, number 1, number 2 on the charts, whatever. But I think their relationship to culture, to the fandom, to like Hollywood, the music industry, so different, right?
For sure.
And I'm really interested in seeing how that plays out long term. I think like Chappell, for example, I mean, Sabrina does the typical Hollywood, like she's like shiny, whatever, making jokes. She knows what she's doing.
Well, she came out of a literal star factory, whereas Chappell Roan's been around for a while, but didn't come out of that star factory.
Chappell Roan's like 0 to 100 like real quick. No one knew her, then everyone knew her. Like she's been coming up
real slow, like, then real
slow. It's kind of like psh, psh.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's insane just how different they are. And, you know, I've been toying with this idea of people are always saying, yeah, they want celebrities to be like really vulnerable, to be really open, you know, like, yeah, people should take control over their relationship with their fans and all of that stuff. I was on TikTok the other day, and I don't know, my algorithm was just like really into Chapel that day. And there was a lot of hate from like really young people as well. Like, oh, she has no work ethic. This is like Gen Z. You just can't cancel a concert. Some of which I understand. Like, if I had traveled and paid to see someone and they had canceled the day before, I'd be really pissed and stuff. But just like the idea of like, you know, really interacting with all this stuff that we say about how we want celebrities to behave and to act, like how much of that is actually even true, you know?
Because talk about that a little bit. Like so we say we want them to behave how that might
take care of your mental health. That's one.
Sure.
We say that all the time.
I understand.
You know, be vulnerable with your fans. Have good boundaries. You know, be open about what you believe in. Like, don't do things you don't believe in. Be like a good person, basically. Right?
But then
be
if you
human.
do that, if you
do it a little bit too much, it's kind of like within a like very sellable whatever.
An Overton window for that kind of behavior. Yeah.
You good at the words. Yeah, that's the thing, right? And she has crossed that, you know, I think. And even in the last 2 weeks, just like the way the media is covering her is so different. Like, I put something on my newsletter yesterday, just like 2 pictures of like an article came out about like Sabrina Carpenter. She's like times 100 with, you know, Sabrina with like just smiling, whatever. And there was another cover story of like, you know, Chappell Roan isn't doing great or something like that. It was on the New Yorker, and I put those side by side. And even if you Google like Chappell Roan, you Google Sabrina Carpenter, you go to the news section of Google, the stuff that comes up, so different.
Interesting.
And so I'm really interested in seeing like, how does this go and what does this say about what we want celebrities to be, actually? Because it's kind of like we have them side by side, music, popping, like the only thing that's different is like them and what they stand for. And yeah, it's really interesting to me.
So, okay. So I'm interested to know, you know, speaking of what the kids are listening to, right? Like I am almost twice your age. And so the notion of Chappell Roan and Sabrina Carpenter for me is very, it's a little bit distant, and I tend to relate it to stars of the past whose journeys I lived with or in some cases stewarded, right, in some ways. I wonder how you as a young person look at them and go, okay, these are effective analogs to my life. They are not effective analogs to my life. Chappell is more effective or Sabrina is more effective. Like, does your sort of interrelation, your parasocial relationship to either of them color the way that you look at them?
So something that's actually interesting is my friends find it so funny that I write the newsletter because I am very, in my personal life, away from some of this stuff. So I don't listen to their music. I haven't listened to Sabrina's album at all. I don't buy
the hits,
stuff.
though,
like,
at least, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I hear it on the
Espresso.
radio, like I know what that is. Like once or twice I've listened to it. But this is the thing when my friends like, Ochuko, like you're like always reading books. What are you talking about? You don't know this shit. I listen to like probably what you listen to as well. I promise you. But yeah, so no, it's how I observe them is just like purely from a, let's write about this, let's think about this. But I talk to
from
my
a brand
friends a
perspective,
lot.
basically.
Yeah,
I mean,
pretty much.
You think of them as from a brand management perspective.
Yeah, I was talking to my friend. She's really smart, and she said that she thinks people like Sabrina because Sabrina does the job. So if you think of like the job to be done, Sabrina is like unproblematic. She brings a lot of levity, a lot of fun. She is like, you don't even know what she thinks about pretty much anything, right?
Yeah.
She is just like she doesn't, there is no
a charming vessel.
Heaviness. Exactly. There's no heaviness to identity. And like with a lot of celebrities right now, you don't find that, you know, there is like, and so I think people like her a lot because it's like, it's just not that serious. And they're, you just like, it's just not that deep, right? And I think people, she gives us her music, she makes her funny jokes, she's cute, she leaves the stage, she dates that guy sometimes, whatever, no one cares, you know, like, you know, that's what my friend said. She was like, she's just sparkling and fun, and she just like is here and gone, right? I think Chapel is becoming more of a vessel for people's feelings about a lot of stuff, about Gen Z's work ethic, about, people's identities, about the future of celebrity. And it's making people feel very heavily in a landscape that people don't want that right now.
Right.
From a start.
Hence the stronger reaction then, right? Like
exactly.
Yeah. Interesting.
Exactly. So.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm because I'm not to put too fine a point on it, but because I'm kind of too old to have participated in modern fandoms the way that they come out of message boards and social apps and all that sort of stuff. I find the whole thing endlessly curious, but I also don't really feel like I have a strong point of relation. It's fandoms is almost like subculture was when I was a kid, where if you were a skateboarder, you could tell that somebody else was a skateboarder by looking at their shoes, and there weren't very many of them, and so you knew like if somebody had shoes in such a way, that's one of my people, right? I feel like fandoms in a certain respect are now occupying that kind of mode, but I don't have any. I don't feel like I have too much authentic to add to it. So your point of view on this is really is
yeah,
really
no, it's good. Like, I'm just from a band perspective, their music isn't my type of music. It's objectively great, I guess, but I couldn't get through Sabrina's album. Like, I want to listen to, like, I don't know, Coldplay and Imagine Dragons and things that sound like that, which is probably a bit embarrassing to say online because I know some people don't like them, but I'm among
that camp of people. But anyway, we'll have that conversation later.
When people ask me for my taste in music, I say sad white boy music. That is what I want. They're like, cool.
All right, fine, fair enough. Well, so let's keep going on your list then. The next one, if we're just going from the top, the next one is the coverage of Substack design newsletters in the FT over the weekend. What grabbed you about that one?
Well, it was the first time I'd seen coverage about Substack that was in fashion or politics, which I thought was really interesting. I don't know if you've seen a lot of coverage about Substack that is outside of those genres. But I think more and more I've started to think about Substack less from a editorial perspective, but more from a social perspective.
Sure.
If I look at the kind of, what they're building, right? And I have this thesis in my head that isn't probably, you can poke a million holes in it, but it's like in every platform, it seems like the first influencers to pop are the fashion people, the fashion girls, whatever. And when I started seeing that happen in Substack, I was like, oh, something's happening, because fashion is so commercial. It's so universal in some ways that it's very easy to be and I've been just wondering, how is that going to trickle down? If you look at Substack as this vessel for the taste economy, maybe because people are starting to talk about that. Obviously, fashion is a pretty easy place to start, right?
Sure.
What comes next? Design. Wow, I saw that. I was like, okay, yeah, this thesis is kind of true. And then,
I see. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's what is all the things that are going to pop up, right? I mean, look at Instagram. It was at least for me, my introduction to Instagram and YouTube, when they became truly commercial, was all the fashion influencers and the beauty influencers and all that stuff. And then they become much more niche. And so I think I'm tracking the growth of Substack as a more commercial product in that way, because when you when you're in Substack, it's hard to remember that most people don't know what it is. A lot of people in my life don't know what Substack is. They subscribe to a newsletter, but they don't have the app. They don't use it the way we who have Substacks use it. And so I guess I'm really interested in how it's penetrating into the more general public zeitgeist and tracing that through just sort of the traditional media coverage.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I don't know that Sammy Rice and Snake and David Michon and Fourscale are necessarily the ones that are going to translate into mass appeal.
Yeah.
Their voices are so distinct and so vernacular. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I loved that one because, I mean, Sammy is a friend and former guest on this show, and then and secondly because both him and David, who writes Fourscale, are just so sui generis in terms of their voices, in terms of their style, and they just don't care to make it palatable for the non-expert. And me as a non-expert, like I get very attracted to that because it's very different, and I'm like, okay, let me understand.
I felt the same way. Like I found their Substacks through that FD article, and I just like went into a deep dive, and I was like, shit, this is really cool. I barely understand, but like, give it to me.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think, you know, so Forescale is very good at sort of setting a higher aesthetic tone and discussing the aesthetic worlds that designers create or that design trends create. Sammy does a little bit of that, but also is so good at zeroing in on the items and the signifiers, the signs and signifiers that help you navigate. And also he's really good at setting the tone on or market making, almost like saying this table is the best ever up to $800. It's an absolute steal. And so you go, okay, right. Now I can sort of put into perspective what it takes to build a life, what it takes to build a sort of design first kind of approach. Anyway, I love those two, and I was stoked that you get that. I also really, really love the FT Weekend. I think it's the best weekend newspaper that there is by a long shot. And so I shout out the FT all the time, but I really like that one.
I love them. Do you have, since you're like a links person as well, do you have this thing in your head where you have like a running scoreboard of like who's doing the best, like who's giving me stuff I can actually use? I think I have that in my head. Like up top are always like Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and the FT. They always give me good material. And I'm like, I barely get anything from like WAP or whatever. Do you have that at all?
No, kind of, sort of. I mean, you know, I have a little bit of a tortured relationship with those three that you named because Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and FT are all heavily paywalled and expensive paywalls. Yeah. And so, you know, in a certain respect, I'm trying to think of, again, because I started writing SIC, or I started compiling SIC in the first place for the kids fresh out of school at Vice who were trying to like understand the worldview. I didn't want to put it'd be like, okay, go buy a Bloomberg subscription kind of thing. So I have a little bit of a tortured relationship with them. That being said, I link to them all the time, and I link to the FT probably the most because most of the articles that I'm interested there come from the arts and leisure section, which they tend not, or from How to Spend It, which they tend not to paywall.
Not to paywall, yeah.
So,
I don't really think about the paywalls in my roundups, which is interesting. Yeah, no, I don't know.
I mean, look, I think there are a million ways to get around those things, and so I don't have great compunction about including a paywall link, but I do try not to be too heavy on that. Partially because I don't want to signal that I'm part of some sort of paying class of media consumers where
I have never thought about this before. Literally,
that, you know.
I've never thought about this. Now I'm going to be like, oh.
I mean, but here's the thing, right? Like what you should be doing is hearing from your readers. Like so as a for instance, I got a comment. I asked for comments on, you know, going into my most recent volume, and just said, you know, do you like this many links or fewer links? What do you this, that, or the other thing, right? Because I'm constantly interested in what people say. I'm not great at acting on that feedback, to be honest, but I like to know what it is. And I got a piece of feedback. I put in a lot of New York Times articles because my basic philosophy is if you're going to pay for any news product in the world, it's the New York Times. That's a little bit of ethnocentrism here. I'm sitting in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, but beyond that, it's just like I feel like it is kind of the paper of record in many respects. But I got a note from a guy he's a very, very senior leader at one of the biggest advertising holding companies in the world. And he's like, I refuse to pay for the New York Times. And so the fact that you link to the New York Times all the time bums me out, but keep the links coming. And I was just like, you're not the person I would expect to be price sensitive on the New York Times, but lo and behold, you know.
That is so interesting. I've never gotten that feedback about what I put behind stuff. Maybe it's because I'm explaining what's in the link anyway.
Yeah,
maybe
that's the whole thing too. I mean, I think my compilation style, I'm kind of evolving it a little bit, particularly for the stuff that I do for my paid subscribers. But you add a lot of context, and what I originally started to do was to try to pair the headlines in a way that there was a running narrative, and so all you had to do was read the top. And
do you know that because of you, I know the word corollary? Is that how you say it?
Corollary?
Yeah, because you use it all the time. I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it. It's and corollary, apropos. These words are important to me because they are indicative of the way my mind goes. It's very. I think in a very associative fashion, and part of the reason that I need all of this information is because otherwise I'll sort of like grind to a halt in a topic and not get there. Well, anyway, speaking of corollaries, corollary to this discussion about your leaderboard, your mental leaderboard, is the next story that you put in, which was CNN, the most popular news site in the U.S., putting up a paywall. So they announced yesterday that they're putting up a $3.99 a month paywall for CNN for readers, and I don't think they specified how many articles you get for free until you hit paywall. But I wondered, what was it that struck you about that one?
But I've been thinking a lot. I think this is, part of what you were saying about just like how much people have to pay for information, how much people have to pay for news. So because of the newsletter, I subscribe to like pretty much everything, right? And it's expensive. It's quite expensive.
Yeah.
And then there's all the Substacks and all of that stuff. I love CNN, CNBC, NBC because they're free, right? But again, like I listen to a lot of podcasts where people are talking about just the business of media, and CNN has been coming up a lot. What's his name? He started Status, Oliver something. Oliver Darcy. I've been like loving his newsletter, and he's ex-CNN, right? So he writes a bit about CNN. He was on a podcast talking about CNN, and about their business, how they're scaling. And so I kind of expected that paywall was going to come up soon, because what are they going to do otherwise, right? Sure. Their linear business is like in decline. There's nothing they can do. I think I was interested, A, is it too late for them to do this? B, their journalism isn't like the New York Times. It isn't like the Washington Post. It isn't like the Wall Street Journal.
There's some people in Atlanta that would take issue with that statement.
For me, right? Yeah. And so, and I was like, so how are you going to compete on that? Well, their pricing is quite different. That's one thing. But then whatever CNN covers, all these other free media outlets also cover, right? And to my understanding, CNN's thing is very much breaking news. Like that is sort of like where they've made in the last couple of years, shifted their strategy a lot to breaking news. And you break news a couple of minutes later, a couple of hours later, someone's already writing about it, right?
Sure.
And so it's kind of like, how is it going to work for them? Because it's getting pretty hard to convince people to pay for subscriptions. Things are really expensive. I've had this conversation with like just so many people over the last week, even with Substack. These days when I do a paid Substack, I have to take one off. Like
is that so this is like your closet now? It's a one in, one out situation?
It's like one in, one out thing, because they're getting like so much, right?
Yeah.
And so apart from the like CNN issue and like how that's working from their business, I guess I'm also kind of curious about like what's it going to do to media consumption, right? Because I guess people are always complaining like young people get their news from TikTok, young people like don't know anything, Instagram, fake news. I wonder what kind of barrier to entry that is going to make just for like the general person that's like
interesting around like verified, factual, capital J journalism. News.
Or even if you get the headlines, even if it's not fake news, even if it's whatever. I love reading these articles because you get to see how really smart people think about stuff. The kind of words they're using, what is their mental map? And if you don't have that kind of information, if you don't I like to read the same story from the Wall Street Journal, from the New York Times, I like to, how are different people talking about the same thing? I'm a nerd. Like I like that kind of stuff.
I mean, or a glutton for punishment, one way or the other. But okay.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. There's all these articles flying around now about how young people don't have can't read, don't know how to make sense of information, whatever. And I'm like, everything is paywall. How is this how is this going to play out for people's wallets, for people's intellect? I don't know. It's just a huge thing that there's the issue with CNN's business, which I'm like, good luck with that. You should have done that years ago, but I want to see how that plays out. I've heard that The Verge is going to put up a paywall as well. and Reuters just put up a paywall. So that's like 3 in a week, which is really interesting to me. So yeah.
I mean, look, the economics of the media business have changed so as to be unrecognizable at least twice in the last 20 years. And so it makes sense that all of the services will try to figure that out. I think Mark Thompson at CNN, looks at what he was able to set in motion when he's at the New York Times and go, all right, we know that paid subscription can work. We know that it's a matter of then just like diversifying the offering and becoming the one information source. And I think this is what you're going to see them do. It's like they have to become the one information source for their consumer to the greatest extent that it can be possible, which means they need to be talking about what's happening in Gaza, and they need to be talking about Chaperone, and they need to be talking about what just happened at Paris Fashion Week, and they need to be talking about I don't know what. Like, I'm sorry, having to look down at my son's skateboard and say skateboarding. So anyway,
who do you think does that well? No, sorry, keep going. Finish
but this is so funny. You should ask. The people that I think do it well are you, Emily, people on Substack. You know what I mean? And so that to me is part of it. It's like I see the paywall strategy being the first in a series of dominoes falling that sees CNN move to a broader set of cultural verticals that they cover, that sees them bringing in smart, analytical, but sort of multifarious voices like you. Not to say you're going to get hired by CNN, but you know what I mean? It's like, I think they start looking at people who are cultural filters who can speak the language across a number of different
that is so modes. Interesting. Yeah. Because as you see, like, traditional media come to Substack, are we going to see Substackers go to the traditional media? Is that going to happen?
100%. And I mean, so and not just Substackers. I mean, I think you'll see that with TikTok. You'll see that with et cetera. But you're gonna see them take a portion of the business that is more like what Puck is doing, or what like Sarah Fisher's voice at Axios is so bright in that sort of media space. You're going to see them do more of that, and then the last thing they'll do is they'll look for what I always joke about is I don't joke actually, what I call super formats, which is like, how do we take As Seen On by Ochuko and make that it's a newsletter, yes it's a column, yes it's a podcast, yes it's a video, yes it's a I'm trying to grab a coffee table book here or whatever, to literally we go, it's As Seen On, and so here are Ochuko's last 50 smart images or whatever, and so they will build and dimensionalize in that way.
God.
And I think that's the future of those kinds of media businesses. The thing that strikes me about the CNN paywall, and Neiman Lab wrote a lot about it yesterday, was that if the Times is getting $20+ a month, if Bloomberg is getting, I don't know what, $40 a month, Wall Street Journal $40 a month, like, to go into the market at $4 feels either like bait or like they don't really believe in the product. And so it's, that's what I find interesting about it.
I wouldn't pay for it if it was higher. I wouldn't, which is really weird. I mean, would you?
Well, it's not, no, but it isn't weird. Yes, I would pay more if I felt like there was the stuff at CNN that I really wanted or really needed, like the way I feel about the New York Times.
Yeah.
But they have to be asking the question, do we want the Ochukos where our lifetime value of this relationship is decades long, or do you want the Bens who are going to die soon? And so, just joking, of course. I'm going to live for a long time. But anyway,
to that.
Yeah. All right. Well. Okay. So let's switch gears for a second, because I want to talk about the next story on your list, or actually, I want to skip one, and I want to skip a couple, skip one, and I want to talk about this Wall Street Journal story about, which is titled "Sorry Harvard, Everyone Wants to Go to College in the South Now." this one jumped at me because I just sent my son to Elon University in North Carolina, which was a school that before we began the college discovery process, I literally had never heard of, but which it's one of those things where I ask people over 35 about Elon and they're like, where's your son going? And I ask people under 35 and they're like, oh yeah, I have a bunch of friends there. It's amazing. He's going to love it.
I've heard about it. Yeah.
I found, good. Glad you're validating my theory. But in any case, I just thought I'm sort of living this trend. So I wondered what it was about it that jumped out at you.
So I went to college in Portland, small liberal college.
Was that Reed or was that
Lewis and Clark? The lesser Reed.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, not Reed. Sell yourself short.
Whatever. But I went there, right? It was really politically charged. It was really interesting to have that be my entry to the United States, to be in that place. Sure. Yeah, it was just like, I was like, is this how everywhere is? I liked the school. It was fun, but it was really weird, I know that Gen Z is the very liberal, generally speaking here, more than like other whatever generations. But that's the stereotype, right? We're very open, we're very whatever, that kind of thing. Something that I've been seeing, even amongst my Lewis and Clark liberal friends, whatever, is that like exhaustion with having to deal with all of this and talk about all of this. Right.
By all of this, you sort of mean, don't let me put words in your mouth, but do you mean identity politics and the
identity politics, even just all of it, like everything you're probably thinking, right?
The notion of needing to be sort of always on and always representational,
always fighting, always representational. Yeah. By the time I left the U.S. in my first year here, I was so blind to German politics because I was like, I'm done. It was really weird coming to the U.S. to just identity, whatever, for me, in a place that placed so much emphasis on that. Very strange. I don't know if it would have been better or worse if I went to another place, but that was just my experience. But I think people are really exhausted about talking about it, for better or for worse, right? This is not like a good or bad thing. That's just what I'm seeing, right? Also, and so people don't want to deal with that. I think in the last academic year, the protests that were happening took a toll on a lot of people, right? They did what they believed in, but it didn't work out the way a lot of people then wanted them to. And then people are asking, people that are watching, or saying that, is this what I want my college experience to be? Because I think that, if you're growing up in the last couple of years, you're seeing Bama Rush on TikTok. That looks hella fun, right? You're seeing all the football parties. That looks really fun. And it sounds that's so rudimentary. That's not I think it's a very uncomplicated thing. It's cheaper. The weather is nicer. Yeah. And for a certain person, it's more comfortable because you're not confronted with a lot of things that being in these certain elite liberal schools force you to talk about. Yeah. For better or for worse. I'll put the caveat on that, for better or for worse. I don't think it's an objectively good or bad thing, right? And obviously, if you're a white man, a brown person, a black person, your experience might be different. Yeah. But I think that is a thing. I think young people are getting just kind of tired of carrying that, wanting to do the right thing all the time, and wanting to have the right opinions and talk about it constantly and present their whatever, that kind of thing. And, they're I've just talked to a lot of people who have younger siblings going to college who are reflecting on their college experience. And they were I wish I was in Florida, just partying. And I'm okay. So.
Well, I don't know that certainly wasn't, I don't think it was the motivating factor for my son. I still, to be honest,
what do you think was his? Yeah.
Well, it's, it's hard for me to answer that question because it's almost impossible. And you may find this at some point in the future, but it's almost impossible to divorce your specific motivations from those of your kids. And and particularly for me, because I have a son and a daughter, and so naturally, it's like I identify he's also my firstborn, so so I identify his path much more closely with mine, and I came from Syracuse, New York, like, you know, third tier city in America, on the decline in the Rust Belt, like amazing, kind of almost like unlikely how diverse a city it was, and how diverse my experience growing up was. But I just wanted to get out. I wanted to get out. I wanted to go to a bigger place. I went to college in Philadelphia. Then I wanted to get to New York because I wanted to be the center of the world. And so for him, having grown up here in Brooklyn, to then go, I want to go to school in a tiny town in effectively like rural North Carolina, it's just hard for me to understand. By the same token, I think what attracted him was that it is very different to his experience, and he's expanding his world by doing that. So I think that was it. He's one of the amazing, you know, diehard Northeasterners, spiritual descendant of Syracuse, who likes the weather in the Northeast better than in the Southeast.
That is insane to me. Wow.
I don't know. I mean, this is, you know, you get in where you fit in. But he's that's the one thing he's complaining. He's like, it's awfully hot down here. I can't. He brought all these hoodies. He's like, I can't wear my hoodies. But he's having a great time. So
I'm glad
I think you're right. I think the notion that these places are sort of lower gravity environments where you can actually exercise your, you know, proverbial muscles and figure out where you fit into the world is probably more attractive now than it was before, especially given that it's like, you know, every other article says, well, the college degree is the only thing that matters versus the college degree doesn't matter at all. Like,
yeah, that's another thing.
Like
I
Mark
mean,
Zuckerberg
you're always on the news.
Harvard, or, you know,
people have been giving that excuse forever. They're like, Mark Zuckerberg dropped. I'm like, you're not Mark. Like, stay in school.
Let's hope you're not. We only need one of those guys.
Yeah. But again, like, these are, whenever I see all these articles, like, everyone is doing this, no one is doing this, it's always like a sliding scale. Like, it's never always an exaggeration. So you know, you never know.
Right.
It might be more of a thing or less than a thing.
Yeah. Look, this is what I mean. A lot of that, and you, in a certain respect, grew up in it, but also in a certain respect, probably didn't have the critical distance to see it. But a lot of that binary, like, position taking has to do with the fact that the digital media ecosystem values cheap eyeballs over expensive substance. And so what has happened is, it's like, let's chase virality, let's chase hot takes, let's chase polarizing opinion. And so the whole media ecosystem gets into a mode where it's like, okay, what we're supposed to do is troll. And so, because that's what's going to drive page views, because that's going to drive ad impressions, because that's going to drive, you know, economic results. And it's bad. And so the fact that there are now people, and you know, again, not to blow smoke, but like, you do a good job of this, I think, of going like, no, we live on a continuum of opinion. I have differing points of view about these various things, and all of this stuff collectively matters to my worldview. It is a much more, to me, modern way of, or not even modern. It's just a more accurate way of expressing the way we all feel, right? As opposed to in binaries.
Yeah. And I guess that's like that's the benefit of like being in someone's inbox and building that relationship over time, right? You have to like know what you're saying and be sound in, you know, your perspective, and you can't just be everyone, no one, whatever. So
yeah, well, I mean, everyone's going to listen to this podcast and change them. So, you know,
they better.
Cool. Well, so, all right, let's keep going down the list here for a second. Oh, okay. So this is one that I have. So I don't, you know, it not news to listeners or subscribers, but I've been married for a very long time. In fact, I just celebrated my 20th wedding anniversary last week. And so this story that you picked out about after the new dating app that tries to tackle ghosting was interesting to me, largely because I have like as you'd imagine, zero relationship with any of those apps. I don't know if you do. I mean, it sounds like you have a boyfriend in a committed relationship, but like, what was it that struck you about that one?
Well, I was on the apps. My first boyfriend in the US, I met him on Hinge. And so in college, I was on the apps. I deleted it COVID times. I haven't been on it for a very, very long time. But I just thought it was funny. Look, I'm seeing all these new apps pop up. I'm seeing Tinder and Hinge keep trying stuff. Yep. And then I'm seeing all these new apps with very specific takes on the dating stuff. So it's either like, no swiping, or we do video instead, or they're just like tackling very specific like pain points with the usual apps and like blowing it up and making like that feature like their whole narrative, right? Sure. And so I think it's very interesting to trace how these companies and new founders are trying to tackle this problem of like dating, right? With this consensus that like it must be an app or whatever. And I think, yes, go out and meet people, but I think we've all advanced to the stage in culture, for better or for worse, where like there's always going to be some app and people are going to be using it. I think that's for sure. I thought this one was really interesting because I thought it was weird. Like, if someone ghosted me, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want some random message, from an AI bot telling me this is why they ghosted you. Yeah. I just thought it was funny and just like really weird. Yeah, I would prefer. Okay, keep going.
No, please. I want to know what you would prefer. Go ahead.
If I get ghosted, like, I mean, on Tinder, people ghost people all the time, whatever. I don't even think it's ghosting until like you have my number. I think it's like you can do that. That's my personal take. That like, sure, if it hasn't left the app, if it's still on the app, you're free to ghost. At least that's what I used to do, and people used to do that to me. It's like, if it's not clicking, I don't owe you an explanation. We're just on the app. I'm going to ghost. And so I talk to my friends, and people feel pretty similar to this. Like, it's ghosting when like I've given you my number, we're talking, whatever. Once it's out of the app, for me, that's when it's real ghosting. Once it's on the app, I think it's a free-for-all, like whatever. Right. Okay. And so I think it'll be more interesting if, they're forcing people, whatever, to say why, if like, I swipe on someone and we're talking and I ghost them, whatever, they want you to say why you did it. Right. I thought it'd be cool if that happens a couple of times, they can get some like aggregate feedback on whatever and then give it to me in a more instructive dating coach kind of way. Sure. And less of a, this is why this person ghosted you, this is why this person ghosted you, this is why this person. Give me like a whole narrative. Take the trends of all those individual ghostings, give me like a narrative, and then coach me, right? I think that'll be way more interesting than what I think they're trying to do. Otherwise, don't do it at all. I think, I don't know.
Yeah, it feels like a masochistic tool for serial ghosters and a masochistic tool for pain sponges and a sadistic tool for serial ghosters, as opposed to an actual sort of solve. All right. Well, anyway, I guess going to live vicariously through my kids on the app stuff. So I'm going to continue to pay attention to it, but it doesn't sound like a lot of fun. So
it isn't fun. When I was in college, it was kind of fun. Like, I remember it was really nice when you would swipe on someone who also went to your school to see if they swiped on you. And then you'll just know. And then you look at them in the cafeteria and you're like, oh, I know you think I'm cute. But I met my boyfriend the summer I graduated, and so I haven't been on it for a long time. But my friends all hate the apps. They despise the apps. All of my friends. Sure. And so, I'm interested to see what takes over that. Because they hate the apps, but also aren't going out as much as they maybe should. And so there's nothing to fill in that gap right now. And I'm so curious to see how that evolves over time.
Yeah, interesting. All right. Well, speaking of evolution over time, for our last one, we should cover the arrival on Substack of Sophia Amoruso, legendary founder of Nasty Gal, the proponent and figurehead of the Girlboss movement. Full disclosure: Sophia and I are friendly, and so I am interested to hear what your take is about this. And
I love her.
And you could say bad things too. That would be fine.
No, I put it there because I was just excited. I was like, I don't even know what I'm going to say apart from being excited. She subscribed to my newsletter and I sent a screenshot to my friend. I was like, oh my God. My friends know I love Sophia. I've been following her since her Girlboss time. And I think when that whole thing happened during COVID of like all the anti-Girlboss whatever, I hated that. It made me really sad. And I think it was the first time it just felt like a witch hunt, you know, a lot of the time. Yeah. And I think it was the first time that I was like, if I ever make something, if I'm ever out there, I am going to be not face forward. Like, I'm just going to be doing my thing because people are crazy. And just seeing how much
ties back to the fandom conversation a little bit.
Exactly.
Too.
You know, seeing how much joy people, it's kind of like you're building on top of the world. It feels great. And unknown to you, there's all this like latent resentment about you. And then once there's like something that may or may not be valid for people to catch on to, it's like you're like, where's all this coming from? And so seeing that happen with like a string of female founders for me was just like, I don't know, I was like, 19 in my college dorm, just like watching, and I was like, shit, like this really sucks. And so seeing how she's been able to rebuild over the last couple of years has been really cool for me. And then seeing her on Substack, it just made me happy. And it made me excited, like, oh, she doesn't like stay down. This is so freaking fun. And I love that. And I think I've been trying to, you know, I don't remember the specific allegations as to like any of those female founders, to be honest. I'm so sure a lot of them were very valid and stuff.
What it comes down to, and it gets into this, you know, very generationally coded conversation around fragility, I think. But it's like she was mean, or she seemed mean, or I don't
I'm
know.
so over that stuff.
I struggle with it.
I struggle. I was also struggling. I was like, oh, what is happening here?
Yeah.
And just like Adam Newman, I read a lot about him because I just think he's funny. Like, just the way these men can just do whatever. Like Elon Musk, how they just like, and I'm not like supporting bad behavior or whatever, but it's just so interesting to me how as a woman, you're climbing up, you think people are with you until they have a chance not to be. Yeah. And then the narrative completely changes. I remember, I think it was Audrey Gumlin. She was on the cover of Inc. magazine a couple of months before all that went down with like her baby bump. It was like, oh my gosh. The Wing.
The Wing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then literally a couple of months after, the narrative was so different around her. Mm-hmm. And I think even that's why, like, obviously as seen on is like a much tinier scale. I'm not trying to compare. Much tinier scale. I think no matter where this goes, like my life as a Ochuko, separate. Like I'm not a fan of like performative vulnerability. I read that a lot. Or I really struggle with the idea that because you're creating in public, people feel an ownership to you or your life. Sure. I really struggle with that. And so, yeah, it's something I think about a lot. But I was really excited just to have her on there because like, oh, like Substack is like here. And I saw that Plum Sykes was actually going to come on Substack. She's making her own Substack, going to launch.
Oh, right. Cool.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, all these people. It was fun. It just made me happy. So.
No. Well, I mean, it made me happy too. I've got to give Sophia a shout and say hello. But yeah, look, I mean, I think there's a momentum building, and you are evidence of the fact that you don't have to be on for 6 years like I have, or 4 years like I have. 6 years doing the newsletter.
You've been on how long has Substack existed? I thought it was like 3 years old. I think it's
no, it's at least 5 because I've been on for 4 years, more than 4 years now, slightly more than 4 years, and I got on because of going full circle. Our friends at Why Is This Interesting, when they started publishing Why Is This Interesting, that was my first awareness of Substack, and so I was like, oh, okay, this is an interesting platform.
It feels a really cool time to be here, where I feel like it's the first time that I feel early enough to something that like you're early, you're actually getting to see the evolution of a platform, but like not too early that like it's like a slog for a while, right? That you're seeing the benefits like pretty quickly. You certainly have. So I'm and that I think is probably a testimony to your voice and your work ethic and just generally your kind of point of view on things. So thank you.
Makes sense.
I try my best.
All right. Well, Ochuko, it's such a pleasure to meet you and such a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for jumping on and joining me for SIC Talks number 85. Everybody, if you don't already subscribe to As Seen On by Ochuko, go find it on Substack. I'll, of course, it'll be in the newsletter. But beyond that, just a really essential read for me, and one I think will be for you too. So thank you again.
I love it. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll speak again soon. But in the meantime, thanks guys for tuning in, and we will see you again next week. Bye.